Hi, I'm Dr Kelly Teagle. This is the presentation I gave at a Women's Health Week event in Dubbo called Better and Better, Changing and Growing Through Menopause. Menopause looks different for every woman, but one thing's almost universal, and that is a cultural focus on the negative aspects of menopause, like ageing and deterioration, dreadful symptoms, a loss of youth and beauty, and grieving for the things that we had before. This evening, I'm going to challenge you to reframe your thinking about perimenopause and beyond, to subtly shift your focus from what's been lost to what's being gained, to focus on growing and changing through the menopausal transition. I'm going to use the REFRAME concept as an acronym to touch on important areas of change in midlife. I'm also going to give you a cook's tour on the very topical subject of HRT and break it down to a handful of key principles. So the overview is I'm going to cover what is menopause and what can we expect. I'm going to go through the REFRAME acronym for you, and then I'm going to present my quick guide to HRT. The first thing to say is that menopause is a normal life stage. It basically means that a woman hasn't had any periods for 12 months, which signals that her ovaries haven't produced any eggs for 6 months. Most women reach menopause between the ages of 45 and 55, with the average being 51. However, 10% can reach menopause outside this range, and 1% will even be under the age of 40. It can be physiological, that is, that she's just run out of eggs, or it could be because of medical or surgical intervention. As ovulations become erratic and eventually cease, estrogen levels will fluctuate and gradually decline overall, and that leads to these symptoms of menopause which are fairly classical, like hot flushes and mood disturbances, sexual and vaginal changes, sleep disturbances, muscle aches and pains, cognitive difficulties, which is difficulty in thinking and remembering, and urinary issues. About 80% of women will get some kind of menopausal symptoms during their transition, and about 20% of those will get them quite severely. When I first meet a woman with menopausal symptoms, I like to get her to fill in this kind of score sheet so that we can very quickly ascertain which are her primary symptoms of concern and where we should be targeting our treatment options. So don't think that just because you're still having periods that your symptoms can't be because of perimenopause, because symptoms can actually start well before the last period. Women often want to know how long their symptoms are likely to last for, but that does vary quite a lot. The average is probably about 3 to 6 years of symptoms, but for some women it can go on for more than a decade. As I said, around 80% of women will experience menopausal symptoms at some time, and the self-reported incidence of moderate to severe hot flushes in Australian women in their early 50s is up to 50%. That is, about 50% of them are suffering with symptoms at any given time. But sadly, around 85% of them are not getting any effective treatment. This Australian study from 2016 estimated that of the around 2.5 million women in this country aged 40 to 65, about 385,000 of them are suffering with untreated moderate to severe hot flushes, or VMS, which stands for vasomotor symptoms. This is an enormous burden to the well-being and productivity of our communities, and it undermines women's ability to work or care for themselves and their families. So why is this happening? Australians are generally a well-educated bunch with expert advice and treatment options available to them. But I believe that the breakdown's occurring because of conflicting information and fear around those treatment options and a lack of access to trusted expert advice. So this is where we begin to reframe menopause, starting with the recognition of its signs and symptoms. The rest of the REFRAME acronym stands for exercise, food, relationships, attitude, mental health, and expert advice. And I'll speak about each of these in a little more detail. Now, we saw a range of typical menopausal signs and symptoms on earlier slides, but it's important to remember that not everything that causes those things will be menopause. It's really important to see your GP and to make sure that you're otherwise well, and then become educated about how to look after yourself in midlife. So, firstly, recognise the signs and symptoms, go and talk to your GP, and seek out expert help. This website from Jean Hales has a wonderful range of resources available to educate yourself about menopause and about a lot of other women's health topics besides. Also, the Australasian Menopause Society, which informs both doctors and consumers about the latest evidence related to menopausal issues and treatments. Their information sheets are wonderfully concise and readable evidence summaries, which I highly recommend. The E stands for exercise. When we're considering our exercise regimen from midlife, it's really important to consider two key facts, which is that with the decline in estrogen levels, we get an increase in heart disease risk and a significant reduction in bone density. In fact, in the 5 years after menopause, a woman can lose up to 20% of her bone density. So it's really important to focus on a regimen that targets and prevents those things from happening. For cardiovascular fitness, it's important that we increase the intensity of our workouts so that our heart rate and our breathing increase. It's more important that we get this higher intensity exercise than it is to walk 10,000 steps a day or go for walks with the dog. It just doesn't have the same impact on getting your heart disease risk down. It's also important that we maintain muscle mass for bone strength and for overall strength. Also, muscle is really important metabolic tissue, so we want to hang on to that by increasing the resistance and weight training in our exercise routines. It's also really important to include some impact and balance training to increase and maintain our bone density and to reduce our falls risk so that we don't have any catastrophic fractures. This table, which comes from a Jean Hales article about bone health, shows the types of activities on the left which are much better at increasing and maintaining bone density than the activities that are on the right-hand side. The difference between these activities is the level of impact, that is, the jolting force that goes through the skeleton with the activity. So things like tennis and running, anything that will put a jolting force through your skeleton allows the bone cells to lay down bones along the lines of those forces. So this table is a really great guide overall to the sorts of activities that we can be including in our routine to help increase and maintain bone density. The F in REFRAME stands for food. There are many effects of declining estrogen on the way we metabolize our food and gain weight. One of those is the fact that reduction in estrogen causes women to move less. We've seen from mouse studies where they removed the ovaries of mice that this caused the mice to move less, that is, their amount of incidental activity decreased. And then when estrogen was replaced, the mice resumed their normal levels of activity. So there's some kind of physiological trigger from reductions in estrogen that causes us to have a reduction in incidental movement. Also, reduced estrogen means that our metabolism is lower as well. So overall, this leads to a decrease in the amount of calories that we're burning. We therefore need less calories in our diet. But if women fail to reduce their portion sizes according to their new calorie requirements, this will cause weight to accumulate. And because of the reduction in estrogen levels again, it's more likely that weight will be central weight gain, which is higher risk for heart disease. So there are a few important principles when it comes to food. Overall, we just need a whole lot less food. And because of that, it's very important that the food we do eat is much more dense in nutrition and with a particular focus on calcium-rich foods for bone density. It's also really important that in the approach to menopause, we try and have a healthy weight because it's so much more difficult to try and lose weight postmenopausally. So keeping the focus on not gaining weight and maintaining a healthy weight is really important. Obesity is just one of the risk factors for heart disease, and heart disease is the leading cause of death in Australian women. In fact, your risk of dying from heart disease is about 3 times your risk of dying of breast cancer. This slide shows on the right-hand side a list of modifiable risk factors. That is, things that you and your GP can work on together to help to reduce your cardiovascular risk overall. Whereas the things on the left-hand side are things that you can't do anything about. The next 3 points in the REFRAME acronym relate specifically to quality of life in its more emotional, spiritual and mental aspects. Because if we only focus on our physical well-being during this transitional stage, then we're missing out on a huge part of the picture. Midlife is an amazingly dynamic time, with changes occurring in many areas of our lives, such as our parenting role, because kids are becoming more independent, leaving home, and sadly often bouncing back. But changes in our caring role as well, because our parents are becoming elderly and more dependent and eventually dying. With our work role, we can be getting more responsibilities or perhaps less responsibilities, easing out of the workforce and facing retirement. With our partners, we might be facing divorce or repartnering or perhaps even contemplating moving into the future alone. The sexual and physical changes that come with aging impact enormously on our self-image and self-esteem. But then there are also a bunch of new freedoms which come with midlife and menopause, such as freedom from menstruation and pregnancy, freedom from having to work, freedom from parenting, and financial freedoms, plus the time to do things that we never had time for before. Taking the time to reflect and make emotional adjustments to all of these changes is incredibly important to our quality of life at this time. So the R, the second R in REFRAME, stands for relationships, to remind us to invest in quality relationships with partners, friends, family, community, and importantly, ourselves. A stands for attitude. Before midlife, we may have defined ourselves by our work or parenting role or other areas of our lives. So moving forward, it may be important to redefine ourselves according to who we want to be in the future. We need to find our new passion in life, what it is that makes us want to get out of bed in the morning and gives us our lives meaning and value. There needs to be a shift in focus from the things that we can no longer do to the things that we can still do and the things that we want to invest in and improve and change and learn. Midlife is a fantastic time to pause and to reflect on your achievements, to acknowledge everything that you've achieved to this point in your life. You've worked hard, you've learned so much, you've been resilient, you've gone through good times and bad times, and you've learned valuable lessons. So all that wisdom and experience gives you confidence moving forward and the ability to be able to help those that you love to move forward with their lives. And that's to be celebrated. Also, we need to be making plans to learn and to grow, exploring new activities and options rather than stagnating and declining. M stands for mental health. As the focus of our lives change, we may have more and more unstructured time on our hands. So making plans and having purpose gives life meaning, but without them, it is easier to succumb to apathy, withdrawal, or depression. As our lives change, we need to maintain an awareness of our thoughts and feelings and be prepared to take steps early if things aren't going well, using self-care activities like exercise and relaxing and having strategies to reduce drugs, alcohol, creating distractions for ourselves, giving our lives structure and meaning. Your GP is a fantastic first port of call to discuss any concerns that you have about your mental health. They can set you up a mental health care plan if necessary, and they can refer you for counselling, and they can show you electronic resource and treatment options, or they can prescribe medications if they're needed. E stands for expert advice. Seek out expert medical opinions regarding your menopausal symptoms. Speak to someone who knows what they're talking about and has experience in prescribing for menopause, and that person may well be your GP. But also, you need to be finding a good GP so that they can look after your regular health care and your general health issues and screening. So now that we've been through the REFRAME acronym, I'd like to just spend a few minutes talking to you about HRT, or hormone replacement therapy, because for this week in particular, it's been a very topical subject and people have a lot of questions. I'm going to tell you a few key principles about HRT. The first of those is that for women who have debilitating hot flushes and night sweats due to estrogen deficiency, HRT is likely to be the most effective treatment for their symptoms. That's been shown clinically and in studies over and over again. One of the key principles in prescribing hormonal replacement therapy is timing. It needs to be said that if HRT is started around perimenopause, which is the lead up to menopause, when women are having their worst symptoms usually, it's very, very safe and effective to start hormonal replacement therapy at that time. If women don't have a uterus, if they've had a hysterectomy, then they can just have estrogen treatment alone. However, if they still have a uterus, then they need to take a progestin as well to balance out the estrogen, and that's called combined hormonal therapy. The reason for that is that whilst the estrogen gives the beneficial effects that they're looking for on their symptoms, it can also re-stimulate the lining of the uterus again and cause bleeding. So the role of the progestin is to stabilise and thin the lining of the uterus to prevent that from happening. Another key principle in starting HRT is the way it's delivered. Oral estrogens have been shown to have a small increase in the risk of unwanted blood clots. But if we deliver the estrogen transdermally, that is through the skin in the form of a patch or a cream or a gel, it doesn't seem to have that increase in risk of unwanted blood clots. For women who are taking HRT for their menopausal symptoms, there are other knock-on benefits, such as a reduction in bone loss, decreased heart disease risk, and benefits in other areas of the body, such as in vaginal dryness. There are very few absolute contraindications to taking HRT, but women who absolutely shouldn't take estrogens include those who have had breast cancer or have a current increased heart disease risk or blood clots. And then there are some other medical conditions in which we would use caution for prescribing, but very few overall absolute contraindications. A big topic in the media in the last couple of weeks has been breast cancer risk with HRT. We've known for quite a long time that the use of some progestins in HRT can confer a small increase in breast cancer risk after 5 years of use. So that information is not new. In reality, what that means is that for doctors who are prescribing HRT, that will be leaning towards progestins which don't seem to have that increase in breast cancer risk. And that includes things like micronized progesterone. So the type of progestin that's used is very, very important, and you need to be working with someone who has expertise in prescribing for menopause to make sure you're on the safest possible regimen. There are other medical therapies that can be effective for people who can't or wouldn't like to use HRT, such as certain types of antidepressants, which can reduce hot flushes by up to 50%, and also other sorts of medications, such as anti-epileptic medications, although they do come with an increased range of unwanted side effects. So we wouldn't use those as first line typically. With respect to complementary and alternative therapies, many women will report a modest benefit from using them, and some studies have shown that as well. But it's important to remember that overall, the evidence shows that complementary and herbal therapies are not as effective at treating hot flushes as HRT. It's also important to realise that because they're not regulated preparations, that there can be a lot of variability in the purity and the potency, that is, the dose delivery of these products, and that we have not very much information about how efficacious and safe they are to use. The important message here is to become educated and well informed, ask questions of your doctors and GPs, and use reliable websites for information such as the Jean Hales and Australasian Menopause Society's websites. And remember, if you can't get the expert help you need for your menopausal symptoms, then check out WellFem, wellfem.com.au, for online consultations, information and advice from expert female menopause doctors.